The silence behind the sunglasses. The Roy Orbison mystery has finally been solved, and it isn't good. For decades, Roy Orbison was the man in black, an enigmatic silhouette framed by jet black hair, a motionless stage presence, and ever-present dark sunglasses. His voice, however, told a different story, hauntingly operatic and soaring beyond the range of ordinary men. It was a voice soaked in longing, in heartbreak, in some unreachable place of sadness. People called him the Caruso of rock. But unlike his peers who played the rock and roll rebel or the charming pop icon, Roy remained silent, unmoving, untouchable. And when he died suddenly at 52, just as his career was experiencing a remarkable second wind, few asked deeper questions. The official cause was a heart attack, but beneath the surface lay a chain of warning signs, ignored traumas, and institutional negligence that painted a darker portrait of the man behind the voice. Why did no one intervene as Roy pushed himself past the point of exhaustion? Why was he working non-stop, even as friends noticed his face growing hollow and pale? And most unsettling of all, what if his silence wasn't a choice, but a symptom? To understand the tragic truth behind Roy Orbison's final days, we have to start with the image he created. A motionless man bathed in spotlight, hiding behind his glasses, singing songs that made the world weep, even as it failed to truly see him. Because now we know, the silence behind those glasses was real, and it may have killed him. The velvet voice from nowhere. Roy Orbison was born in 1936 in Vernon, Texas, a speck of a town where the sky stretched wider than the roads, and dreams didn't always come true. He was the second of 3 sons in a working-class family. His father, Orby, was a laborer. His mother, Nadine, a nurse. There was little glamour in their lives, but there was music. By age 6, Roy was already singing on local radio. By age 7, he was playing guitar, taught by his father and an older cousin. And by age 10, he'd declared his destiny: I'm going to be a singer. But from early on, something about Roy didn't quite fit the mold. He wasn't brash or charismatic. He didn't move like Elvis or provoke like Jerry Lee Lewis. He was quiet, polite, and intensely shy, more observer than performer. His thick glasses, which he began wearing as a child due to severe vision issues, only deepened the gap between him and the flashy world of rising rock stars. What he did have, though, was that voice, a towering cinematic tenor that bent around phrases like wind around cliffs, rising, trembling, aching. It was a voice that seemed almost unnatural for his appearance. Audiences expected swagger. What they got was crying, Only the Lonely, and In Dreams, songs that didn't just entertain, they ached. In the 1960s, Orbison was at the height of his fame, touring with the Beatles, headlining charts in both the US and the UK. His songs were dramatic, even operatic, but he rarely smiled in public, always in black, always with sunglasses, always still. He explained it away with humor. He once joked that the dark clothes made him look slimmer, the sunglasses a necessity after leaving his prescription glasses on a plane. But over time, the look solidified into an armor, a character, a mask. Privately, Roy was warm, even funny with close friends. But in public, he was a ghost with a voice, beloved, but not quite known. As fame escalated, so did the weight of expectation. While others chased scandal or reinvention, Roy stayed in his lane. The tragic crooner, the man in the shadows. The vulnerability in his songs resonated with millions, but behind that emotional power was a man already bruising under pressures the world couldn't see. Because what no one knew then was that Roy's life would not be marked by stages and stardom, but by an almost mythic series of losses that would test even the strongest soul. And Roy Orbison, for all his voice's strength, was still only human. A life of shadows. By the mid-1960s, Roy Orbison had achieved what few musicians from small-town Texas could dream of. He had international fame, a catalog of chart-topping hits, and a devoted wife, Claudette, whom he married in 1957. They were young, glamorous, and unmistakably in love, appearing in fan magazines and posing for press photos as the perfect American couple. But behind the curtain, the reality was already beginning to crack. The life of a touring musician was unforgiving. Roy was constantly on the road. Claudette, often left behind, struggled with the loneliness of his absence. Rumors of infidelity began to swirl, on both sides. Their relationship turned turbulent, swinging between reconciliation and resentment. In 1964, they divorced. But something in Roy couldn't let her go. He later said she was the love of his life. Just 1 year after they separated, they remarried in hopes of rebuilding what had been lost. And for a moment, it seemed possible, but the happiness didn't last. In June 1966, Roy and Claudette were riding on a motorcycle through Gallatin, Tennessee, when a pickup truck pulled out in front of them. The crash was sudden, brutal. Claudette was thrown from the bike. She died instantly. Roy never fully recovered. He returned to the stage quickly, too quickly, many said. He kept singing, kept performing, but something inside him had collapsed. That haunting sadness in his voice, once a signature, became something real, etched into every lyric. But the worst was still to come. Just 2 years later, in 1968, Roy was on tour in the UK when he received a phone call that would undo him completely. A fire had broken out at his home in Hendersonville, Tennessee. His 2 young sons, Roy Jr. and Anthony, were trapped inside. Despite rescue efforts, both boys perished in the flames. Roy was 32 years old. In less than 24 months, he had lost his wife and 2 children. It's hard to describe what that kind of grief does to a person. Friends said Roy became quieter, more withdrawn. He rarely spoke of the tragedies. He almost never mentioned Claudette or the boys in interviews. The man whose music gave voice to loneliness now found himself living inside it. Because what no one knew then was that Roy's life would not be marked by stages and stardom, but by an almost mythic series of losses that would test even the strongest soul. And Roy Orbison, for all his voice's strength, was still only human. A sudden end, too quiet. In 1988, it finally felt like Roy Orbison was coming back to life. After 2 decades of relative obscurity, the music world had begun to rediscover him. David Lynch had famously used In Dreams in the film Blue Velvet, reintroducing Roy's eerie voice to a new generation. Then came the Traveling Wilburys, a supergroup that felt like it had been conjured out of fan fiction. George Harrison, Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, Jeff Lynne, and Roy Orbison, not just included, revered. They didn't see him as an old relic, they saw him as royalty. Roy, now in his early 50s, was working non-stop, recording vocals, giving interviews, smiling more than ever before. The spark seemed to return. He was finishing his first solo studio album in years, Mystery Girl, and the lead single, You Got It, was already turning heads. But beneath the surface, there were signs, and they weren't good. Roy was gaunt. Friends quietly remarked that he looked ill, pale. He was thinner than usual and often seemed tired, but he brushed it off, blaming the demands of the studio, the travel, the excitement of the comeback. He refused to slow down. There were tour dates, video shoots, press junkets. Every day was scheduled down to the minute. On December 6, 1988, Roy visited his mother in Hendersonville, Tennessee. They spent the afternoon together. That evening, he returned home and reportedly complained of chest pains, but again, he downplayed it. That night, around 11 p.m., Roy Orbison suffered a massive heart attack and died. He was 52. The official cause of death was myocardial infarction, a heart overwhelmed. No drugs were found in his system, no signs of foul play, no suicide, just over. The music world was stunned. Mystery Girl would be released posthumously to critical acclaim. You Got It became his first top 10 hit in over 2 decades. Fans mourned the loss of a voice, but few asked deeper questions. Because on paper, it made sense. A man in his 50s, a history of heart trouble in the family, a stressful career. But to those who had seen him in those final weeks, working late nights, jumping from state to state, barely resting, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel natural. There were whispers. Had he been pushed too hard by management? Had anyone advised him to slow down? Could better medical oversight have made a difference? And what about those chest pains earlier in the day? Did anyone urge him to go to the hospital? The industry moved quickly to celebrate his legacy. There were tribute concerts, compilation albums. Roy was back on magazine covers. But the reality was, he died working. He died exhausted. And for a man whose entire persona was built around stillness, quiet, and restraint, his final months were a blur of demands, deadlines, and mounting pressure. There was no time left for silence. Just when Roy Orbison seemed ready to live again, something, maybe someone, pushed him past the point of no return. Hidden pain, industry pressure, and a fatal push. In the months following Roy Orbison's death, the narrative that emerged was comforting, even poetic. A legendary singer, reborn into fame, dies at peace just after finishing his greatest work. It made for a romantic ending. But the truth is rarely romantic, and the more you look, the more you start to see it. Roy didn't die peacefully in his sleep. He died in a silent crisis, crushed by years of unprocessed trauma, neglected medical red flags, and the grinding machine of an industry that loved his voice more than his well-being. By 1988, Roy was on a grueling schedule that would have tested even a man half his age. His manager, Barbara, also his wife, was praised for revitalizing his career. But revitalization came at a cost. Back-to-back promotional tours, studio deadlines, video shoots, and rehearsals. Some close to him later admitted that Roy had asked for breaks, that he wanted more time between commitments. But there was too much at stake. A career comeback, a major label contract. The spotlight he had been denied for years had finally returned, and he was expected to stand in it no matter the cost. Insiders claimed that Roy had been suffering from angina, chest pains indicative of heart stress, for months. He had a history of cardiac issues. He was a heavy smoker for much of his life, yet no one seemed to hit pause. He kept performing, kept recording, kept moving. There's also the question of medication. Though no illicit substances were found in his system at the time of death, some sources pointed to a dependence on prescription drugs, likely used to manage pain, sleep, or anxiety. This wouldn't have been unusual for a man carrying as much emotional and physical weight as Roy was. But the line between management and masking is thin, very thin. In the days before his death, he had just returned from Europe. Jet-lagged, overworked, he went right back to business. One day later, he was gone. Some critics of the music industry have pointed to Roy's death as a textbook case of artist burnout. The signs were there: a body under stress, a mind still grieving decades of personal loss, a man who had quietly endured the death of his first wife, 2 children, and most of his career, all while wearing sunglasses and singing like nothing hurt. But it did hurt, and no one truly stopped to see how much. We also have to ask, what did comeback mean for Roy? Was it redemption, or was it a trap? He had finally found acceptance among peers, but did he feel like he had to earn it every day, prove he was still worthy? Did he feel like he couldn't stop, even if it killed him? Because here's what's clear now. Roy Orbison was not just a casualty of time, or fate, or family history. He was a casualty of silence, of the myth that stoic endurance is strength, that performing through pain is noble. It wasn't noble. It was lethal. And somewhere along the way, someone should have stopped the machine. Could the tragedy have been prevented? It's tempting to believe that Roy Orbison's life was simply marked by fate, that some people are born with too much sadness, carried too much weight, and fall too quietly. But what if that's not the truth? What if this wasn't a slow-motion tragedy, but a preventable one? Looking back, the warning signs weren't subtle. Roy's chest pains, his pale complexion, his quiet pleas for rest, his medical history, his schedule. The industry saw it all and chose to keep moving. His wife Barbara, often credited with orchestrating his career's second act, has been both praised and quietly questioned in the years since. Did she push too hard? Was the momentum of the comeback more important than his health? Or had she, like Roy himself, become too good at suppressing pain to see the danger? And what about his team, his label, his bandmates? Those close to him later admitted that Roy didn't like to complain. He wanted to please. He wanted to matter again. But silence isn't consent. Exhaustion isn't ambition. Somewhere, someone could have said, enough. Instead, Roy became another name in a long line of artists who died too soon, not because they were reckless, but because they were compliant. Because the system they served didn't serve them back. In a more compassionate world, Roy's final year could have looked different. He could have toured less, recorded slower, reached for joy instead of legacy. But the system rewards momentum, not health, output, not well-being, even for the most revered voices. What makes it harder is that Roy wasn't self-destructive. He wasn't spiraling in public. He didn't leave behind a trail of addiction, scandal, or tabloid drama. That's what made his death feel so natural. But in truth, his silence was his undoing. And maybe that's the real mystery, how someone so emotionally fluent in his music, so capable of voicing heartbreak, fear, and longing, could go unheard in real life. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Absolutely. But only if someone had looked past the dark glasses, past the stage lights, past the myth, and seen the man quietly breaking beneath it all. The industry didn't kill Roy Orbison, but it let him die. And now we're left with the music, with the velvet voice, with the silence. You think you know what a man sounds like when he's hurting, but what if the songs weren't the cries for help? What if the real cry was the quiet between them? You think, where is the truth? Maybe the better question is, why didn't we listen?